Have you ever stared at an ancient book, its pages thick with intricate letters, and wondered who painstakingly crafted each curve and flourish? How did they make ink that still gleams centuries later? Why did they spend a lifetime copying texts, often in freezing rooms, risking their eyesight and backs? Step into the world of medieval calligraphy, dating from roughly 500 AD to 1500 AD, where the silence of the scriptorium held secrets whispered only through the scratch of a quill on parchment. Number 1. The Scribe's Sacred Oath, a life of devotion. The very air in a medieval scriptorium seemed to hum with silent dedication. It was a place of deep commitment, a life chosen not merely a job. For many centuries, the overwhelming majority of scribes were monks or nuns. They entered monasteries and convents, taking vows that bound them to a life of spiritual devotion. And within that framework, the copying of sacred texts became a profound act of worship. It was seen as an offering to God, a way to spread the divine word, and a means of preserving knowledge for future generations. Becoming a scribe was not a casual decision. It required a significant apprenticeship, often beginning in childhood. A young novice would start by learning basic literacy, then progress to the painstaking art of letter formation. They would practice endless lines of specific script styles, their hands slowly adapting to the peculiar feel of quill on parchment. This training could last for years, a slow, methodical journey where patience was not just a virtue, but a necessity. Imagine a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, brought to the scriptorium. He would first learn to sit still for hours, to observe the older monks working with intense focus. He might begin by grinding pigments for the illuminators, feeling the rough minerals turn to fine powder under the heavy muller. His early lessons in writing would involve copying simple letters, perhaps on wax tablets or scrap pieces of parchment. The master scribe, often a stern but deeply experienced monk, would guide his hand, correcting every wavering stroke, every misaligned character. The emphasis was on absolute precision and consistency. Every letter had to look exactly the same as the one before it and the one after. This rigorous discipline shaped not only their handwriting, but also their entire approach to life. It was a testament to the idea that perfection in their craft was a reflection of their devotion. The daily routine of a scribe was relentless. They rose before dawn, attended morning prayers, and then settled into the scriptorium. The work stretched through the day, broken only by meals and further prayer services. Natural light was crucial, so scribes worked during daylight hours, often until dusk, made the lines indistinguishable. This meant long periods of sitting hunched over a desk, their eyes straining to read the exemplar manuscript and then meticulously retouching it. The physical toll was immense. Chronic back pain, eye strain, and cramps in their hands were common complaints, sometimes even noted in the margins of the very books they created. Some colophons, the notes scribes added at the end of a completed text, openly shared their suffering, asking for prayers or a warm drink for their efforts. One well-known colophon from a 13th century manuscript reads, "As the harbor is welcome to the sailor, so is the last line to the scribe." This expressed the immense relief felt upon finishing a monumental task. The speed of writing was incredibly slow by modern standards. A skilled scribe might only complete a few pages a day, depending on the complexity of the script and the level of decoration. Copying an entire Bible, for instance, could take years even for a team of scribes working in shifts. This immense investment of time meant that books were incredibly valuable objects, treasured for their content and for the sheer human effort poured into their creation. The spiritual aspect of their work was paramount. Many scribes would preface their work with a prayer and conclude it with a blessing. They believed that by copying holy texts, They were performing a sacred duty, contributing to the spiritual well-being of their community and the wider Christian world. The act of writing became a form of meditation, a pathway to deeper contemplation of the words they were inscribing. Each stroke of the quill was a moment of focus, a prayer whispered through action. Not all scribes were monks, particularly as the later medieval period saw the rise of universities and secular book production. Lay scribes, working in urban centers, began to emerge, often forming guilds. These professional scribes catered to a growing demand for legal texts, literary works, and educational materials. However, even in secular settings, the underlying principles of discipline, precision, and respect for the text remain. The training for a lay scribe mirrored that of a monastic one, focusing on mastery of hand and eye. They might not have had the same spiritual motivations, but their dedication to the craft was equally profound. The scribes, whether monastic or secular, were the unsung heroes of knowledge preservation. Without their tireless efforts, much of the classical and early medieval literature, philosophy, and scientific knowledge would have been lost to history. They were the human bridges across time, ensuring that the words of the past could be read by the future. Their life was a testament to patience, an ode to precision, and a sacred oath to the enduring power of the written word. Their legacy lives on in the countless illuminated manuscripts that still grace museums and libraries, each a silent testament to a life dedicated to the careful, beautiful act of putting words on a page. The reverence they held for their materials, from the prepared parchment to the carefully crafted quill, was evident in every shimmering initial and every perfectly aligned line of text. Number 2. The scribe's tools, more than just a pen. A medieval scribe's workstation was a realm of specialized implements, each playing a crucial role in transforming blank parchment into a masterpiece of the written word. It was far more than just a pen and ink. Tools were extensions of the scribe's meticulous hand, designed for precision, durability, and the unique demands of working with parchment and quill. The heart of the scribe's kit lay the penknife, an indispensable item that was far more versatile than its name suggests. This sharp, single-bladed knife was used not only for sharpening the quill's nib, but also for scraping errors from the parchment, a delicate operation that required immense skill. The knife's blade was often thin and exceptionally keen, allowing for the precise removal of ink without damaging the integrity of the animal's skin. A dull penknife meant jagged nibs and messy erasures, so maintaining its sharpness was a constant concern for the scribe. Alongside the penknife, a ruler was essential for creating the meticulous guidelines that governed every page. These were typically made of wood or bone, sometimes metal, and varied in length. The scribe used the ruler in conjunction with a pricker or awl, a sharp-pointed tool, to make tiny holes along the margins of the parchment sheet. These pricked holes served as anchor points for ruling lines, which were then drawn with a stylus, often a lead point or a blunt metal instrument, rather than ink. This method, known as blind ruling, created faint indentations on the parchment, guiding the scribe's hand without visible ink lines that might distract from the finished text. For more permanent or visible lines, a very dilute ink or lead point might be used. Consistency and straightness of these lines were paramount, ensuring that the script maintained a uniform height and that the columns of text were perfectly aligned. Compass was another vital tool, particularly for planning complex layouts, drawing circles for initial letters, or establishing consistent distances for margins and column widths. These instruments, often made of brass or iron, allowed for geometric precision, which was a hallmark of medieval manuscript design. Whether marking out the placement of an elaborate initial or ensuring equal spacing between lines of musical notation, the compass helped maintain the aesthetic harmony of the page. Its points could be used to prick guiding holes at specific intervals, ensuring regularity across an entire book. Mistakes were inevitable, even for the most disciplined scribe, and a pumice stone was their first line of defense against imperfections. This abrasive volcanic rock, or sometimes fine sand, was used to smooth the parchment surface before writing, preparing it to accept the ink evenly. It also came into play when a more significant error occurred, allowing the scribe to gently abrade the surface of the parchment to remove a stubborn ink stain or to prepare an area for rewriting after scraping. Pumice would make the surface slightly fuzzy, but a careful scribe would then re-burnish it to a smooth finish. For more aggressive corrections, or simply for preparing the parchment for writing, a specialized scraper was used. This tool, often a crescent-shaped blade, helped remove any remaining irregularities on the parchment surface, ensuring it was perfectly flat and smooth for the quill's delicate tip. The act of scraping was also crucial for creating palimpsests, where older, less important texts were scraped away to make room for new, more valuable ones. This demonstrated the immense value of parchment itself, often reusing it rather than wasting it. Of course, no scribe's desk would be complete without ink pots. These small vessels, often made of clay, horn, or even lead, held the precious, homemade ink. Scribes typically had at least two, one for black ink and another for red, and sometimes more for different colors. The ink pots were designed to be stable, preventing accidental spills, and often had a narrow opening to minimize evaporation. The ink was a vital part of the process, and its quality and consistency were meticulously maintained. Pen case was sometimes used to protect the precious quills, made from wood, bone, or leather. These cases kept the delicate quill tips from breaking when not in use. Some scribes also carried a small sponge, often kept slightly damp, to clean their quills or to moisten the parchment surface for specific ruling techniques. And for drying the fresh ink, fine sanding powder or a blotting powder made from finely ground cuttlefish bone or even a natural earth pigment might be sprinkled over the newly written lines, then gently brushed away, absorbing excess moisture and preventing smudges. The scribe's desk itself was a custom-designed piece of furniture. Many scriptoria featured carrels, individual workstations that offered privacy and focused light. These desks were often sloped, providing an ergonomic angle for writing, and allowing the scribe to see the exemplar and the work in progress simultaneously. Some had built-in compartments for tools and inks, making everything readily accessible. The meticulous arrangement of these tools on the desk was part of the scribe's disciplined routine. Each item had its place, ready to be picked up and used with practiced ease. The rhythmic scratching of the quill, the subtle whisper of the penknife sharpening, the gentle scrape of corrections, these were the sounds that filled the scriptorium, a testament to the continuous purposeful activity of the scribe, armed with their specialized array of instruments. Every stroke, every correction, every meticulously ruled line was the result of a deliberate interaction between the scribe's skill and these invaluable specialized tools, all contributing to the timeless beauty of the finished manuscript. Number 3. Oops! How medieval scribes fixed their fails even with extreme discipline and years of training. Medieval scribes were still human, and mistakes happened. A misplaced letter, a skipped line, a blot of ink? These errors could occur on pages that had taken hours or even days to prepare and write. The process of correction was as skilled and delicate as the initial writing itself, and it revealed much about the value placed on accuracy and the preciousness of parchment. The most common method for correcting a minor error, such as a single misplaced letter or a small ink blot, was scraping. The scribe would carefully use their penknife or a specialized scraping tool to gently shave off the top layer of the parchment where the ink had settled. This was a remarkably precise operation. Too much pressure, and the scribe would create a hole or weaken the parchment, making it unusable. Too little, and the ink would remain. Once the ink was scraped away, the area might be smoothed with pumice stone or a burnisher to prepare the surface for rewriting. Evidence of these script corrections is still visible today in many surviving manuscripts, appearing as slightly thinner or roughened patches of parchment. Historians studying these texts can often see the faint indentations of the original discarded letter beneath the corrected version, a silent testament to the scribe's painstaking work. For larger errors, like a whole word or a line copied incorrectly, the scraping technique would be used more extensively. Sometimes, the original text would be entirely removed and the correct text written over the same spot. This process, when applied to entire pages or even quires, groups of folded sheets, could lead to what are known as palimpsests. In these cases, older, less important texts were deliberately scraped off, often centuries after their initial creation, to reuse the expensive parchment for new, more relevant writings. The original text would still be faintly visible, a ghostly undercurrent beneath the newer script. Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, a 5th century Greek Bible manuscript, is a famous palimpsest where the original biblical text was partially erased in the 12th century to make way for a Greek translation of the works of Ephraim the Syrian. Modern imaging techniques, such as ultraviolet light, can often reveal these hidden layers of writing, uncovering lost ancient texts. Sometimes, errors were corrected by overwriting or rubbing out with a damp cloth or sponge if the ink was still wet. This was less common, as medieval iron gall ink, once dry, penetrated the parchment fibers deeply, making it difficult to completely remove without physical scraping. When a mistake was made and scraping was not feasible or desired, scribes might resort to other strategies. One common method was to simply cross out the incorrect word or phrase with a line and then write the correction in the margin or immediately above the crossed-out text. This approach left the error visible but clearly indicated the intended reading. For example, in the Book of Kells, despite its immense beauty and meticulous detail, some minor errors and corrections are evident, with the word sometimes crossed out and the correct version written just above it. Another system involved adding small marginal notes to correct omissions or errors. If a scribe accidentally skipped a line or a word, they might write the missing text in the margin and indicate its proper placement with a special symbol like a caret, raised to the power of, or a symbol resembling a backwards Z. Sometimes an entire passage was omitted, and the scribe would insert it on a separate slip of parchment, which was then carefully glued or stitched into the manuscript. The goal was always to maintain the integrity and accuracy of the text, particularly for religious or legal documents where precision was paramount. Scribes often worked by collation, comparing their copied text against the original exemplar multiple times. This was done page by page or even word by word to catch discrepancies. This process was tedious but essential for producing accurate copies. The master scribe or a designated corrector would often review the work of junior scribes, marking errors for correction. The very act of correcting an error highlighted the preciousness of parchment. It was an expensive material, and to waste a sheet due to a mistake was a significant loss. Therefore, scribes went to extraordinary lengths to salvage a page, even if it meant hours of meticulous scraping and rewriting. The discipline of the scribe was not just in avoiding errors, but also in the meticulousness of their repair work. Presence of corrections in medieval manuscripts does not diminish their value, but rather adds to their human story. Each scraped mark, each marginal note, each faint trace of a discarded word offers a glimpse into the arduous, dedicated work of the medieval scribe, reminding us that even in an age of such painstaking craftsmanship, the human hand was fallible, but tirelessly committed to perfection. These subtle signs of effort are not flaws, but rather intimate details that connect us directly to the scribes who brought these texts to life centuries ago, revealing their commitment to the integrity of the written word. Number 4. Gold and Glory. Painting with light. Captivating allure of medieval manuscripts often goes beyond the intricate scripts to embrace the dazzling artistry of illumination. This was where books truly came alive, not just as carriers of text, but as vibrant, glittering works of art. The role of the illuminator was distinct from that of the scribe, though sometimes a single monk might perform both tasks. The illuminator was the artist, responsible for the decorative initials, the elaborate borders, and the miniature paintings that adorned the pages. Their craft was about painting with light, as the term illumination suggests, derived from the Latin illuminar, meaning to light up or to enlighten. This lighting up was most dramatically achieved through the liberal use of gold leaf. The process of gilding was a testament to patience and skill. First, the illuminator would prepare the surface for the gold. This involved creating a raised gesso-like base, often made from a mixture of gypsum, chalk, and animal glue. This substance, known as gilding medium or gesso grosso, was applied to the parchment in the shape of the desired design. Once dry, this raised surface provided a foundation for the gold, allowing it to catch the light and shimmer with greater intensity. Then, extremely thin sheets of gold leaf were carefully laid onto the still, tacky, or specially prepared surface. Gold leaf was typically made by hammering pure gold until it was microscopically thin, almost transparent, and incredibly delicate. It was so fragile that a single breath could send it fluttering away. The illuminator would use specialized tools, sometimes a very soft brush or a gilder's tip, to carefully transfer the fragile sheets. Once the gold leaf was in place, it was burnished. This involved rubbing the gold with a smooth, hard object, such as a polished agate stone, a dog's tooth, or even a specialized metal tool. The friction from burnishing pressed the gold leaf firmly onto the prepared surface, giving it an incredible mirror-like sheen that truly illuminated the page. The Book of Kells, an Irish illuminated manuscript from around 800 AD, shows extensive use of gold leaf in its intricate interlaced patterns and figural scenes, demonstrating the mastery of early medieval gilding techniques. Another method for applying gold was using shell gold. This was powdered gold mixed with a binding agent, usually gum arabic, and sometimes honey. The mixture was stored in shells, hence the name, and could be applied with a brush-like paint. While it lacked the raised brilliant luster of burnished gold leaf, shell gold offered a more convenient way to add golden accents and details. Beyond gold, the illuminator's palette was a vibrant array of colors derived from precious minerals, plants, and even insects. Obtaining and preparing these pigments was an arduous and often expensive endeavor. Lapis lazuli, a deep blue mineral imported from Afghanistan, was the source of the most coveted and expensive blue pigment, ultramarine. Its rich, intense hue was reserved for the most important figures, like the Virgin Mary, or for key elements of an illustration. Grinding lapis lazuli into a fine pigment was a labor-intensive process, involving multiple washes and separations to extract the purest blue. For less important blues, illuminators might use indigo, derived from plants, or azurite, a copper carbonate mineral which produced a slightly greener blue-reds were equally striking. Vermilion, a bright, fiery red, was made from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral. It produced a vivid, opaque color, but was toxic to work with. Another common red was minium, or red lead, derived from lead oxide, which gave a warm orange-red hue. For greens, malachite, a copper carbonate mineral, was commonly used, producing a vibrant green. Plant-based greens from verdigris or sap green were also employed. Yellows could come from orpiment, an arsenic sulfide mineral that produced a brilliant opaque yellow but was also highly toxic. More common yellows were derived from plant sources like saffron or weld. Whites were often made from lead white or chalk. Once the raw pigments were obtained, they had to be ground into an incredibly fine powder. This was done using a muller and a grinding slab, typically made of porphyry or marble. The finer the grind, the more luminous and smooth the paint would be. After grinding, the pigments were mixed with binding agents to create paint. The most common binders were egg yolk for tempera paints, gum arabic, a resin from acacia trees, and sometimes animal glue. These binders allowed the pigment particles to adhere to the parchment and to each other, creating a stable paint layer that would last for centuries. Consistency of the paint was crucial, allowing for smooth application and intricate details. The illuminator's techniques often involved layering colors, applying washes, and creating delicate outlines. The process demanded not only artistic talent, but also a deep understanding of materials and chemistry. The Book of Kells, the Lindisfarne Gospels, and the Tres Riches Heres du Duc de Berry are spectacular examples of medieval illumination, trotting the breathtaking range of colors, the shimmering gold, and the intricate details that transform a manuscript into a transcendent object of beauty. The illuminator's art was not merely decorative. It reinforced the text, adding visual richness and often deeper symbolic meaning to the written word, truly painting with light to bring sacred stories and knowledge to glorious life. Number 5. More than just writing. The art of citides. The medieval world was a vibrant tapestry of written forms, each distinct script carrying its own history, purpose, and aesthetic. A scribe was not merely a copyist. They were a master of these varied scripts, each demanding specific hand movements, quill cuts, and a trained eye for proportion and consistency. The evolution of these writing styles tells a story of cultural shifts, technological innovations, and the changing demands for literacy. In the early medieval period, following the decline of the Roman Empire, uncial and half-uncial scripts predominated. Uncial, characterized by its rounded capital-like letters, was a majestic and dignified script, often used for important biblical texts and legal documents. Its name comes from the Latin word J, perhaps referring to a Roman inch, suggesting a large letter size. Uncial letters were separated, making them highly legible, but slow to write. Half-uncial, as the name suggests, was a slightly smaller, more flowing version, introducing some louis forms and allowing for faster copying. These scripts were widely used across Europe, but their regional variations began to emerge as the centuries progressed. As monastic centers grew in importance, particularly in Ireland and England, unique insular scribes developed. The most famous of these was insular minuscule, seen in masterpieces like the Lindisfarne Gospels, circa 700 AD, and the Book of Kells, circa 800 AD. This script was characterized by its compact, intricate letters, often featuring elaborate ascenders and descenders, and a distinctive wedge-shaped finish to many strokes. Insular scribes often incorporated elaborate ligatures, joined letters, and abbreviations, making the script somewhat challenging for modern readers, but incredibly beautiful and economical for its time. The artistry of insular minuscule often blurred the lines between writing and drawing, with letters sometimes transforming into zoomorphic or interlace patterns. A pivotal moment in the history of medieval scripts arrived with Charlemagne's efforts to revive learning and standardize writing across his vast empire in the late 8th century. This initiative led to the development of Caroline minuscule, a clear, elegant, and highly legible script that rapidly spread across Western Europe. Scholars and scribes at centers like the Abbey of Corvey and the court school at Aachen adopted and refined this script. Caroline minuscule featured distinct, separate larynx letters, clear spacing between words, and minimal ligatures. Its legibility made it ideal for widespread copying and education, and it formed the foundation for the modern Roman lowercase alphabet that we use today. Many classical texts were preserved, by being copied in Caroline minuscule, which helped disseminate knowledge and culture across the Carolingian Empire. Its influence was so profound that it remained the standard for centuries, representing a high point of clarity in medieval handwriting. However, as the High Middle Ages progressed and demand for books increased, especially with the rise of universities and urban centers, script began to evolve once more, driven by a need for efficiency and economy of space. This led to the emergence of Gothic textura, often referred to as black letter. In the 12th century, this script is characterized by its compressed, angular, and often dense appearance, resembling a woven texture, hence textura. Letters were tightly packed together, with vertical strokes often appearing parallel and connected, forming a fence-like pattern. The Gothic script saved valuable parchment space, making books cheaper to produce, and its strong vertical emphasis allowed more text to fit onto a single page. There were many variations of Gothic script, including textura quadrata, the most formal and angular, textura rotunda, rounder and more legible, popular in Italy, and various forms of cursiva, more flowing and informal, used for everyday documents and later for early printing. The difficulty of reading old scripts for modern eyes often comes from their unfamiliar letter forms, the lack of consistent word spacing in earlier scripts, and the abundant use of abbreviations and ligatures. For example, in Gothic textura, the letters I and U could look very similar when adjacent, leading to what is called minims, vertical strokes that required careful counting to decipher words. Scribes learned sophisticated abbreviation systems, often using suspension marks or superscript letters, to save time and parchment. Common abbreviation for per might be a P with a line through its descender, while Q with a loop could mean qui. Mastering these abbreviations was a significant part of a scribe's training. The beauty and structure of each script were paramount. A formal bookhand, like textura quadrata, was a work of art in itself. Every letter precisely formed, every line perfectly aligned. Even more informal hands, used for personal notes or rapid copying, still maintained an underlying structure and clarity. Choice of script often depended on the purpose of the manuscript. A liturgical text or a lavish Bible would be written in a grand, formal hand, while a legal document or a student's notes might employ a faster, more utilitarian script. The Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells stand as supreme examples of highly formalized and decorative insular hands, while later manuscripts like the Gutenberg Bible represent the zenith of Gothic textura, directly influencing the earliest printed types. Each script represents a fascinating chapter in the story of human communication, a testament to the scribes' mastery of the written word, adapting and evolving with the changing needs of their time. Number 6. The invisible grid, mastering page, lot, and design. Long before a single drop of ink touched the parchment, a medieval scribe or a layout master would meticulously plan the page, creating an invisible grid that governed every letter, every line, and every margin. This careful preparation was a secret to the aesthetic harmony and legibility of medieval manuscripts. It ensured consistency not just across a single page, but throughout an entire volume. Sometimes hundreds of pages long, the process began with pricking the holes. Using a sharp awl or a pricker, the scribe would make tiny, almost imperceptible holes along the edges of the parchment sheet. These holes were precisely measured and spaced, acting as reference points for the horizontal and vertical lines that would define the text block. Often, these holes were pricked through a stack of several sheets at once, ensuring uniformity across multiple pages. Presence of these small pricked holes is still visible today in the margins of many ancient manuscripts, a silent witness to the meticulous preparation. Once the holes were pricked, the scribe would begin ruling the page. This involved connecting the pricked holes with faint lines that served as a guide for the writing. Early medieval scribes, often used a technique called blind ruling or dry point ruling. Here, a blunt stylus, a metal point, or even a bone tool was pressed onto the parchment, creating an indentation without leaving any color. This method left no visible marks once the text was written, preserving the pristine appearance of the page while still guiding the scribe's hand. The texture of the parchment, with its hair side and flesh side, influenced how these dry lines appeared, often being more visible on the flesh side. Later in the medieval period, scribes began using lead ruling, employing a stick of lead or a dilute ink to draw the lines. These lines were often very faint, intended to be unobtrusive once the text was complete. Sometimes, these lead lines are still discernible today, particularly where the ink has faded. The ruling lines were not just for the individual lines of text. They defined the entire layout and design of the page. This included determining the justification of the text, ensuring that the lines were straight along both the left and right margins, a hallmark of formal medieval calligraphy. This was a complex task, as scribes had to anticipate the length of each line and adjust their letter spacing accordingly, sometimes subtly stretching or compressing words to fit. The establishment of generous margins was also a crucial element of medieval page design. These white spaces around the text block were not wasted space. They provided visual breathing room, enhancing the legibility of the text and drawing the reader's eye to the written word. They also often served as areas for later additions, such as marginal commentary, glosses, or even small sketches by subsequent readers. In some manuscripts, the margins also contained prick marks or small marks to guide the illuminator in placing illustrations or large initials. Many manuscripts, especially larger ones like Bibles or scholarly texts, were arranged in columns. This required a separate set of vertical ruling lines to define the width and spacing of each column. A typical page might feature 2 columns, sometimes even 3 or 4 for very large books, or those with dense text, like glossed Bibles that included commentary alongside the main text. The systematic arrangement of columns made the vast amount of information more digestible and easier to navigate for the reader. The meticulous process of ruling for columns was just as precise as that for horizontal lines, ensuring perfectly straight vertical alignment. Perhaps one of the most critical aspects of page planning was leaving adequate space for initials and illustrations. The scribe would leave blank areas of various sizes, from a single line height for a simple initial to entire sections of a page, for a full-page miniature painting. These blank spaces were carefully integrated into the ruling scheme, ensuring that the text flowed baking around them. The scribe sometimes left small, faint guide letters in these blank spaces, indicating to the illuminator which initial or image was to be placed there. For example, in the Book of Kells, the spaces for the elaborate initials are clearly delineated within the overall design of the page. Consistency achieved through this rigorous planning was remarkable. A scribe working on a multi-volume project or a collaborative effort with other scribes would ensure that every page in a book, and often every book from a particular scriptorium, maintained a consistent layout. This was often achieved by copying an exemplar, an existing, well-designed manuscript, whose layout and dimensions served as a template. The scribe would measure and record the exemplar's margins, column, widths, and line spacing, ensuring that the new copy was a faithful reproduction not only of the text, but also of its visual presentation. The systematic approach to page layout was not just about aesthetics. It was fundamentally about creating an efficient and readable text. It allowed for the effective use of expensive parchment, minimized errors, and provided a clear visual structure that aided the reader. The invisible grid, meticulously laid out with pricker and stylus, was the silent scaffolding beneath the scribe's art, the hidden secret to the enduring beauty and clarity of medieval manuscripts demonstrating that even before the first letter was written, the architect of the page had already laid the groundwork. Number 7. Feather to fine line. The secret life of the quill. Quill pen was the primary tool of the medieval scribe, a delicate yet durable instrument that channeled ink onto parchment with astonishing precision. It was far more than just a feather. It was a carefully crafted tool, the result of specific selection, preparation, and expert cutting. The secret to its effectiveness lay in understanding its unique properties and mastering the art of its creation. The most commonly used feathers came from large birds. Goose feathers were the staple, readily available, and providing a good balance of flexibility and strength. For finer work or larger scripts, longer, stronger feathers from swan or even crow might be preferred. Some rarer feathers, like those from turkey or raven, were also occasionally used. Not just any feather would do. Scribes often favored feathers from the left wing of a bird for a right-handed writer, because the natural curve of these feathers would bend outwards away from the scribe's hand, allowing for a clearer view of the writing. Once collected, the feathers underwent a process of harvesting and preparation. Fresh feathers were often too soft and oily for writing. They needed to be dried and toughened, a process known as quilling. This could involve simply air drying the feathers for several months or more, actively heating them gently in hot sand or ashes to remove residual oils and harden the shaft. This hardening process made the quill more resilient and allowed it to hold a sharper point for longer. Some sources suggest steeping the feathers in boiling water, then hardening them, further stabilizing the structure. The goal was to create a shaft that was firm enough to withstand the pressure of writing, but flexible enough to respond to the scribe's hand movements. The real artistry began with cutting the nib. This was a precise and skilled operation, performed by the scribe using a sharp penknife. The feather shaft would be cut at an angle, then carefully split down the center to create the nib, the writing tip. The length of the slit and the angle of the 2 points, the shoulders of the nib, directly affected the line quality. A longer slit would allow more ink to flow, producing a wetter, broader line, while a shorter slit would create a finer line. The precise angle of the cut determined the width of the line and the crispness of the edges. For different scripts, like a broad Gothic textura or a delicate Caroline minuscule, the nib would be cut to specific dimensions, sometimes with different angles, allowing for the characteristic thick and thin strokes. Scribes would often carry a specialized honing stone or piece of leather to keep their penknife razor sharp. The durability of quills was limited. A single quill would wear down with use, especially on the slightly abrasive surface of parchment. The delicate nib would soften, the split would widen, where the point would break. A scribe might need to resharpen or recut their quill multiple times a day, sometimes even every few hours depending on the intensity of their work. This constant maintenance was part of the scribe's routine, a brief pause in the rhythm of writing to ensure the tool was performing optimally. The small shavings and discarded nibs would accumulate on the scribe's desk, evidence of their relentless work. Different quill sizes were used for different purposes. A broad, robust quill might be used for the main body of a formal text, producing thick, stately letters. A finer, more delicate quill, perhaps, from a crow feather would be reserved for marginal notes, glosses, or for the intricate details within illuminations. The scribe would have a collection of quills, each prepared for a specific task, often stored in a wooden or leather pen rest, or a cylindrical pen case protecting their fragile tips. This allowed for quick changes depending on the specific demands of the page. The feel of writing with a quill was distinct. It was a fluid motion, requiring a light touch and a steady hand. The quill held a relatively small amount of ink, so the scribe had to dip it frequently into the inkpot, maintaining the flow of ink without overloading the nib and causing blots. The gentle scratch of the quill on the parchment was a constant sound in the scriptorium, a rhythmic whisper of dedicated labor. This scratch, though often minimized by a perfectly prepared parchment surface and a well-cut nib, was the very sound of knowledge being inscribed and preserved. The selection, preparation, and skilled cutting of the quill were fundamental secrets to the scribe's art, ensuring that this humble feather could translate the words of the mind into a tangible, beautiful, and enduring form. It was a testament to the fact that even the most seemingly simple tools were in the hands of a medieval master, instruments of profound craftsmanship. Number 8. Alchemy in a jar, brewing the perfect ink. The luminous, enduring quality of medieval ink is one of the true marvels of manuscript production, a testament to the scribe's understanding of natural materials and their alchemical transformation. Making ink was not a simple task. It was a complex process, often shrouded in secrecy, passed down through generations of scribes. Primary black ink used throughout the medieval period was iron gall ink, a chemical concoction known for its remarkable permanence and deep, rich color. The main ingredients were specific: oak galls, also known as oak apples, which are abnormal growths found on oak trees caused by the larvae of gall wasps. These galls are rich in tannic acid. The second key ingredient was iron sulfate, often called vitriol, a mineral compound. The third was gum arabic, a natural gum exuded from acacia trees, which acted as a binding agent, suspending the pigment particles and allowing the ink to flow smoothly from the quill onto the parchment. The process of making iron gall ink involved crushing the oak galls into a coarse powder and then boiling or soaking them in water for an extended period, sometimes for days. This extracted the tannic acid separately. The iron sulfate would be dissolved in water. The magic happened when these two solutions were combined. Tannic acid reacted with the iron sulfate to form iron tannate, a black precipitate that deepened in color upon exposure to air. This was the pigment. Finally, the gum arabic was dissolved in the mixture, adding body and viscosity, preventing the ink from spreading too much on the parchment, and giving it a slight sheen once dry. Sometimes, other ingredients like wine or beer were used in the soaking process, or even a bit of honey to prevent cracking. The smell of the ink must have filled the scriptorium. Iron gall ink, especially when freshly made, would have a distinct, slightly metallic or acidic aroma due to the iron sulfate and tannic acids. This ink, once applied to parchment, would typically appear as a pale gray or brown and then gradually darken to a deep black or brownish black as it reacted with the oxygen in the air. This process of oxidation was why the ink remained so durable over centuries. It essentially became part of the parchment fiber. The longevity and fading of iron gall ink depended on the precise proportions of its ingredients. If too much acid was present, the ink could eventually burn through the parchment, a destructive process known as ink corrosion, where the acid continues to react and degrade the animal skin. Conversely, a weak ink would fade to a lighter brown over time. Historians and conservators carefully study these variations to understand the composition of different medieval inks. Black ink was essential, but medieval manuscripts often burst with color, requiring various other inks and pigments. Red inks were vital for rubrics, headings, or instructions, from the Latin ruber, for red, initial letters and emphasis. The most brilliant red was vermilion, made from the mineral cinnabar, mercury sulfide. This was a costly and labor-intensive pigment to produce, involving grinding the mineral into a fine powder. Another common red, and usually more affordable, was minium or red lead, produced by heating lead oxide. It provided a warm orange-red hue. These red inks were also bound with gum arabic or egg white. Blue inks were equally prized. The most luxurious blue ultramarine came from the precious mineral lapis lazuli, imported from distant Afghanistan. Its grinding and preparation were incredibly complex, as described earlier, for illumination, resulting in a vibrant, pure blue. For more common blue indigo, a plant-based dye, or azurite, a copper carbonate mineral, were used. Greens were often derived from malachite, copper carbonate, or plant extracts like verdigris. Yellows came from orpiment, arsenic sulfide, saffron, or weld. Preparation of these colored inks and paints often involved grinding the raw minerals or plant extracts into a very fine powder using a muller and a grinding slab, ensuring that the particles were small enough to flow smoothly and create a consistent color. The binding agents, like egg yolk or gum arabic, then suspended these pigments to form a workable paint. The scribes' specific ink pots were small, stable vessels, often made of clay, horn, or even lead, designed to prevent spillage and minimize evaporation. They would contain separate compartments for black and red ink, and sometimes for other colors, if the scribe was also responsible for illumination. Quality and consistency of the ink were under the scribe's direct control, a vital element in their craft. Poorly made ink could ruin an entire page of painstaking work. Therefore, the process of brewing the perfect ink was a true form of medieval alchemy, transforming raw earth and plant materials into a lasting medium that preserved words and illuminated pages for 1,000 years, and testament to the scribes' deep understanding of their materials and their mastery of chemical transformation. Number 9. The magic of parchment, not just any skin. Before a single drop of ink could grace its surface, the writing material itself underwent an extraordinary transformation. The secret to the enduring quality of medieval manuscripts lies largely in parchment, a material far superior to the papyrus of antiquity and the paper that would eventually replace it. Parchment is not just any animal skin. It is specifically prepared animal hide, primarily from calf, goat, or sheep. The choice of animal often depended on regional availability and the desired quality. Calfskin parchment, known as vellum, was generally considered the finest, offering a smoother, whiter, and more durable surface, perfect for high-status manuscripts like the Lindisfarne Gospels or the Book of Kells. The term vellum is sometimes used interchangeably with parchment, but strictly speaking, vellum refers to calfskin. Preparation of parchment was a painstaking multi-stage process that took weeks, transforming rawhide into a smooth, receptive writing surface. First, the skins were thoroughly cleaned of any remaining flesh or hair. They were then soaked in large vats of water, often for several days to soften them. This was followed by a crucial step, steeping the skins in a solution of lime, calcium hydroxide, or other alkaline agents, sometimes for up to 2 weeks. This lime bath served several purposes. It loosened the hair, broke down fats, and swelled the fibers of the skin, making it more pliable. The dehairing process, or scudding, involved scraping the swollen skins with a dull, curved knife, often called a fleshing knife or unhairing knife, to remove all hair and epidermal layers, as well as any remaining flesh on the underside. This was a messy, physically demanding job, often carried out in specialized workshops or by lay parchment makers, parchmenters. After dehairing, the skins were rinsed thoroughly to remove all traces of lime. Then came the most critical stage, stretching on frames. The skins were carefully attached to a rectangular wooden frame called a hearse, or stretching frame, using cords and pegs. As the skin dried, the pegs were tightened, pulling the skin taut in all directions. This stretching was done under tension, preventing the fibers from shrinking and ensuring an even thickness. While stretched, the parchment maker would use a specialized crescent-shaped knife called a lunellum, named for its half-moon shape, to repeatedly scrape both sides of the skin. This scraping removed any remaining imperfections, smoothed the surface, and thinned the high to the desired uniform thickness. This delicate balance of tension and scraping was crucial. Too much, and the skin would tear. Too little, and it would remain too thick or uneven. Constant scraping and restretching also helped align the galgulum fibers in the skin, which contributed to parchment's remarkable strength and flexibility. Once the skin was dry and sufficiently scraped, it was sanded using pumice stone or fine sand to achieve an even smoother surface and remove any lingering imperfections. Finally, it might be lightly whitened with chalk or calcium carbonate to enhance its brightness and provide a better contrast for the ink. The finished parchment had two distinct sides: the hair side, which was slightly darker and had visible follicle marks, and the flesh side, which was usually whiter and smoother. Scribes often arranged the pages in a manuscript so that facing pages were either both hair sides or both flesh sides to ensure a consistent appearance. This consistent grouping helped avoid visible differences in color and texture across an opening. The cost and value of parchment were immense. Producing a single sheet of parchment was a labor-intensive and time-consuming process, and it required the sacrifice of an animal. To create a large Bible, hundreds of animals might be needed. This inherent value meant that parchment was rarely wasted. Even damaged or flawed sheets were often used for less important texts, or cut into smaller pieces for notes. Sometimes, as noted earlier, older texts were scraped off, creating palimpsest, to reuse the expensive material. The superiority of parchment lay in its durability. Unlike papyrus, which was brittle and prone to crumbling, or early paper, which could degrade, parchment was incredibly robust, could withstand centuries of handling, resisting, tearing, insect damage, and environmental changes far better than other materials. Its surface was also ideal for writing. The slightly textured yet smooth finish allowed ink to adhere beautifully without bleeding, and its strength meant it could endure repeated scraping for corrections without tearing. This magical transformation of animal skin into a flexible, durable, and beautiful writing surface was a foundational secret of medieval calligraphy, enabling the preservation of knowledge and art for 1,000 years, and beyond, making the medieval book a lasting testament to both craftsmanship and the enduring power of the written word. Number 10. The scriptorium's sacred silence. The very word scriptorium conjures an image of quiet devotion, a place where time seemed to slow, governed by the rhythm of the quill on parchment. This specialized room, typically found within a medieval monastery or abbey, was the heart of book production, a crucible of knowledge where scribes toiled in sacred silence. The environment within a scriptorium was carefully controlled, though often challenging by modern standards, designed to optimize the painstaking work of copying manuscripts. It was a workplace where discipline and routine were paramount. Typical scriptorium was often located on the ground floor of a monastery, sometimes adjacent to the cloister, or in a specially built wing. This location provided access to natural light, which was absolutely crucial. Large windows, often unglazed or covered with thin membranes in earlier periods, would illuminate the work tables. The importance of light cannot be overstated. Scribes worked from dawn until dusk, relying entirely on the sun's illumination. Artificial light sources like candles were generally avoided for writing due to the risk of fire and smudging the delicate ink. This meant that work ceased at dusk or was relegated to brief periods of illumination for tasks not requiring extreme visual precision. The rules of the place were strict, enforced by the abbot or prior. Silence was usually mandatory, broken only by the gentle scratch of quills, the rustle of parchment, or the quiet rustle of sleeves as scribes moved. Speaking was forbidden communication, often taking place through gestures or a prearranged sign language, to prevent distractions and maintain a meditative atmosphere conducive to concentrated work. This enforced quiet contributed to the atmosphere of profound focus and reverence, fostering an environment where errors were minimized and the sacred nature of the work was honored. The scriptorium was not merely a workshop. It was a place of spiritual labor. The daily life of a scribe was one of intense routine. They typically rose before dawn for communal prayers, attended Mass, and then proceeded directly to the scriptorium. Their work continued throughout the daylight hours, punctuated by scheduled breaks for meals and more prayer services. They sat on benches, often hunched over specially designed carrels or sloped desks. These individual workstations provided a degree of privacy and helped focus the light onto the parchment. The physical challenges were significant. Constant sitting led to back pain, eye strain from meticulous work in varying light, and hand cramps from gripping the quill for hours on end. Some scribes even noted their discomfort in the margins of the manuscripts they produced, sometimes asking for a warm drink or a prayer for their weary bodies. The sounds within the scriptorium were subtle but constant, the rhythmic scratching of the quill on the parchment, the faint rustle of pages being turned, the soft whisper of a penknife sharpening a nib. Occasionally, there might be the dull thud of a grinding muller as pigments were prepared in a separate, less silent area. The smells would have been a mix of animal hide from the parchment, iron gall ink with its slightly acidic tang, perhaps beeswax used to condition parchment, and the faint scent of wood from the desks and shelves. These sensory details paint a picture of a focused, almost monastic calm. Examples of famous scriptoria include the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, known for its extensive library and innovative architectural plans that reveal its various workshops, including the scriptorium. The Abbey of Citeaux, the mother house of the Cistercian order in France, also had a highly organized scriptorium, instrumental in the production of their distinctively austere yet elegant manuscripts. These centers were not only places of production but also of learning and scholarship, where knowledge was preserved and disseminated. The tools present in the scriptorium were specific to the craft. Each scribe would have their personal penknife, awl, ruler, and ink pots meticulously arranged on their carrel. Shared tools, like grinding slabs for pigments or large stretching frames for parchment, might be in a separate adjacent area, often within the larger scriptorium complex. The scriptorium also housed exemplar manuscripts, the texts from which the scribes copied. These exemplars were carefully stored and handled, as they were invaluable resources, sometimes loaned from other monasteries or copied from even older fragile texts. The scriptorium was, therefore, not just a place of writing, but a hub of manuscript preservation and dissemination. It was a quiet universe unto itself, where time and effort were dedicated to the enduring power of the written word, a place where, in the sacred silence, the meticulous work of the scribe brought forth beauty and knowledge for generations to come. The enduring legacy of these quiet rooms echoes in the millions of beautifully preserved manuscripts that still captivate and inform us today.